Quantum healing, the future of medicine.
Right now we're talking about trauma has just happened. And in this volunteer group that I had, they have worked it out scientifically or psychologically that the faster you can get to someone and shore them up emotionally, be with them. You don't have to be skilled. You don't have to have all kinds of degrees and certifications. You just need to be another loving human being that will get into the space of this person and just sit with them. Now, a lot of traumas happen, and then obviously the first people that arrive are the paramedics. And quickly as they're assessing the situation, when usually there's other deaths involved, is leaving the person that's still there, but obviously in a very heightened negative emotional state, and they don't want to leave this person. That's how this program started, is that paramedics felt, and it's not everyone, but if they feel that someone's just emotionally not coping very well with the situation at all, they cannot leave them. Now they're calling in the police because usually that kind of comes together, but usually paramedics are there first, which we all know, and then the police come a little after. And then normally, in order to free those paramedics up, the quicker the police can get there, then they can tell them, do an assessment of the whole situation, and then the police are stuck there because they too don't want to leave this person alone. And so now you've trapped, time-wise, essential workers, which are the paramedics, the ambulances, and the police. So a very brilliant thought crossed through this man, and he said, well, let's do a program of volunteers. So we volunteered, we're not paid to do this work, and we gave up about 2 days of our lives on an off day, and it would be 12 hours that we would be sort of hooked to our phones in case there was a phone call. And they had worked out time-wise that within 15-20 minutes you needed to be at that location. So they would have quite a few volunteers for different locations. And if you got the call, you got the address, it's the paramedics that were calling for help. They had already assessed that help was needed. They need to get on their way because they've got many other calls. Police are on their way, so they only leave once the police have arrived. But clearly this person is not doing well. So they will call in this group, trauma intervention program, and they in turn will call whoever's on duty for that day, the volunteer, and we would jump in our cars with an address and get to that address as fast as we possibly could because time is of the essence. Now, the moment at least any time I got to a location, paramedics had already left and the police were in charge of the scene, and they were assessing also, what was the cause. They had to do all of their work, and fortunately, because of this program, they were able to hand it over to the volunteer who was trained. We were very well trained initially to do this work. Again, you don't need to be a trained professional in any way, but we did train for the basics for a week, all day long. We got a certification, and the police were aware of us. So all the first responders, the fire departments, and they knew that this was a resource they can use, and it's highly, highly successful. So now we're called in and we come to the house. We're meeting with the police who are giving us, I'm asking for what is the assessment, who's involved, where's the body. Usually there is a body involved someplace and it's connected to this person that's not doing very well. And so I need to know all those different variables, and then the police can release themselves and carry on doing their work or leave the scene. It's a very, very interesting process, this, because we actually go through a process when we've been highly traumatized. And what they taught us is that certain things to say, certain things not to say, but your goal of arriving there is to get this person stabilized so that they are perfectly shored up, let's say, with friends, family, their churches, if they belong to any. This is your job, because at that point in time, the person's so highly traumatized, they can't think straight at all. So we haven't even gotten into the area of how you're going to handle it tomorrow when all this is blown over and you need to let people know that there's been a death in the family. There's paperwork to be filled out, who to go to, how do you get death certificates. I mean, there's a whole regimen of paperwork that this person is not thinking about at all, needs some help. So this group also manufactured a little folder with everything someone would need the following day to start applying for the death certificates and who to notify and who to see to close out this person. Very painful stuff that at that moment in time, this person's not even close to that. But that's your goal, to try to help them get these things in place finally. This is a real roller coaster that you take with them. When you first meet someone that's just been through a trauma, they kind of go into a very dark, deep hole. They just descend into this hole and they can't come out. You're just frozen in there. And they know they've got to come out at some point or other. And if you're a volunteer, what I'm talking about, your job was to slowly bring them out of this hole back into the light and give them some strength, basically, that they don't have at that moment in time. So you sort of go down into that hole with them and you just sit with them. You actually really don't need to say anything. The last thing you want to say is, that's normal for us, everything's going to be okay. You don't know that anything's going to be okay. May not be okay. Don't make promises. This person has only you right now in the whole of the cosmos. They are terrified, frightened, blown out of their box, don't know who they are at that moment of time. And you're it. You're the one that is with them. You're the one they're holding on to. So you've got to be very strong. You certainly don't want to lose their trust. And so you just sit with them. And if they want to talk about what's happened, then you listen. Just listen. My experience with these people is that they just really want to get on with their life as it was before the trauma. Of course, it's not absolutely possible, but if it's a home death, let's say, for instance, this was quite easy because I remember walking into one house. It was an older lady and her husband had just passed away, and this was very traumatic for her because she had been married for a long period of time. And when I came in, she was quite distraught and wasn't able to make any phone calls at all to family. She just wasn't in the state of mind to be able to do any of that. So I just sat with her, and as we sat, I asked her a few little questions, and she answered, and then she started to tell me, about her husband and his illness and so forth, and they weren't expecting him to go. She wasn't prepared for this, and this is quite common. But all of a sudden she popped out and she said, this was quite early in the morning when this happened, and I'd raced out to this address. And she turned to me and said, "Have you eaten breakfast?" And I was a little stunned because while I was there to help her, that wasn't her concern. Her concern, and probably the way she ran that household, was to make sure that everyone was safe and comfortable and fed. And she probably handled her husband that way as well. This was a beautiful woman. So here was her concern transferred over to me. Had I eaten? No, I hadn't eaten at all. So she said, would you like me to make you some breakfast? Now, had I said no, because I knew what state of mind she was in, but I also knew that she needed to get to some kind of routine. That was going to help her. This was going to embolden her. If she'd just get back to some semblance of her life before it all blew up. So in this case, obviously, I was hungry too, but I would have forsaken that feeling of hunger if the opposite had been true, and I would never have insisted she made me food. I certainly would have not insisted, well, I'm really hungry. Is there anything to eat here? No, that's not the way you conduct. The person that's had the trauma is you allowing them to lead and you catching them when they collapse too. because often they seem like they're going along and they're getting it. And in this case, I can tell you that this particular woman had made me breakfast. We sat in the kitchen, we chatted just like we were old friends. And then suddenly it all struck her about 5 minutes later, and she literally just, her knees buckled. This is very common too. And she just sort of collapsed, not unconsciously, but just the weight of the emotions. So we had to start all over again. Come and sit down, hold her hand a little bit, just sit with her, be with her. That's what's needed. So importantly, people that are left alone after traumas do so much worse as far as PTSD than people that have that company. So if you can do nothing else and you don't know what to do, it's a lot of things. People want to help. They see things happening. They're going, gosh, how can I don't know how to help. I'm not a nurse. I'm not a doctor. I'm how can I help? That's how you can help. You can just sit with them until professionals come along. So in this case, she did another collapse and I had to help her back into seating, and we just started all over again because I knew the second round she was going to get stronger and stronger. And in the second round, I said to her, is there family that we can call, that you can talk to and start bringing them in and letting them know that, your husband's passed away. And yes, she had a list of people, but she wasn't up to emotionally making those phone calls even. So that's something you can do as well. You can get a list of people that are family and ask them who their best friend is too. Who's your best friend? Do you have a phone number? Can I call them for you? Are you a member of a church or a religious organization or a spiritual group? How do we get hold of anyone? Usually they will have these phone numbers on hand because these are things they're using on a daily basis. So it's not difficult to get these. Now you are trying to encourage someone to make these phone calls, because what you want to do is when you leave that household that they completely supported at that point, that you can safely walk away, that you know that they're well taken care of. Families coming in, if not arriving right away. Their best friend is there. The next door neighbor they always chatted to is always a good person to have there. The minister of the church is on his way too. So they've got a lot of resources people have that they can call upon not to be alone. That's what you don't want. When you walk away from that person, usually, like I said, it's usually about 4 or 5 hours up and down, and you're getting them a little bit stronger each time. But as more love comes in towards them, people that care, people that know them, support them, you can slowly say your goodbyes and make your exit. I always made sure, but then I was sort of trained, so I'm not sure that would be an individual choice, but I always chose to be there when the body was being taken out. Could be more than one body. But in the case of this lady, we'll just keep it simple. This was her husband of decades, and this was her private time with him, really, with his body, basically. At that point, usually when you walk in, either the paramedics or the police have covered the body with a blanket, but you allow someone to have some special time with them. I always like to make sure that they had that special time, that, wherever the body was, they could be alone with them and say their goodbyes. And then we would make a little procession sort of when the coroner's office arrived and the van arrived and they came to pick up the body and took it away. And it's quite a dramatic, sad moment for these people. This is it. So I like to be there for that, to make sure they're okay through that. But then there's a lot of chatting going on and food's being made and people are rallying around the victim, let's say, and I can safely walk away. So it's just an example, but it's definitely something you can do in the meantime before the help arrives. Just do not leave that person alone.